Word on this. Well, thank you everyone for coming in today. And maybe Nelson, would you mind introducing Brian? Because I can't say the name of the university. It's in French, I think.
Okay, yeah, sure, I'll do that. Thank you, Isabelle, for the opening prayer. So hello, everyone. Nice to see you all here today. I'm very pleased to introduce you a colleague of mine, and I would say a friend of mine, Dr. Brian Harvey. Brian is a retired professor of forest ecology at Université du Québec in Abitibi-Témiscamingue, and he was more specifically working in what we call the Institut de Recherche sur les Forêts, which is the Forest Research Institute in Western Quebec. And for as long as I've known, Brian has been involved in silviculture research, but that imply looking at forest dynamics from an ecological perspective, and he was instrumental at bringing ecological forestry in Quebec and helping people understand how we can do ecosystem-based management in our forests. So it's a great pleasure to have him with us today to share bits of wisdom and things that he has learned over the years and things that he wants to share with us. Merci, Brian. Donc, on t'écoute avec intérêt.
Merci beaucoup, Nelson, et mes much Isabelle aussi for the prayer and as much. I would first like to recognize, acknowledge that I live and have worked over the years in an area, a territory that has been occupied by Indigenous people for over 6,000 years, and particularly by the Abitibi. You see a couple, this map on the left is from nativeland.ca.
Brian,
yeah.
Just the slide is still the first one.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Go to the second one.
Okay, hold on now. I just reprendre le partage. How about that?
Yeah, your screen. What ton écran est pas. Okay, et peut-être recommence.
Okay, I'll start over again. Okay, I was on the first slide, and then this, you see this, my second slide?
Yes, oui, maintenant c'est la second slide.
Okay,
ouais.
okay.
Oh, there, hang on.
Là, ça fonctionne, Brian. It's good.
Okay.
Second slide. Yeah.
Okay, so on the second slide, and I would like to acknowledge that I live and have worked over the years on in a territory that's been occupied by Indigenous people we know for over 6,000 years, and particularly, although there is some overlap on what just be traditional land occupation on the map on the left, it's known that the Abitibi were particularly present on this land and are still very present. A couple of photos, first at the mouth of the Duparquet River on Lake Abitibi of a rassemblement of Native peoples at the beginning of the last century. And then where the Lake Duparquet forest is situated, there are over 50 archaeological sites that have that are recognized, and some that have been actually dug and explored that show proof of occupation over the last 6,000 years. Perhaps before I start, the first thing, as I said, thanks to Gordon and Nelson for inviting me. It's just taking me out of a very comfortable and non-threatening retirement into presenting something that was a big part of my life, my professional life for some time. I'd like to mention in the beginning that, first of all, this presentation, I'm not sure to what extent it will contribute to the work of this group that has the objective of seeking ways of reducing use of herbicides in public forests. And also that I have to confess my ignorance. Since the days of the Lake Abitibi Model Forest, I haven't really kept up to date with forest policy management in Ontario, and I can even say in Quebec now recently. And so I'm not aware of regulations, obligations concerning public consultations or coalitions with special groups such as Indigenous peoples. So keep that in mind in this presentation. I'd like to, Nelson and Gordon kind of gave me a carte blanche. So this presentation has evolved over up till this last week, where I wasn't really thinking of doing this second part, but then I said, well, I think natural regeneration of white spruce is an important aspect that I'd like to talk about. So basically, the presentation is in two parts. But to begin with, I'd like to give a little background about where we are. This is a map by Ken Baldwin of zoning of the Canadian boreal forest. So you see the mixed wood thermal boreal in the south, the continuous coniferous black spruce forest in the middle, and then the taiga, the open forest of the further north. The FIRLD, which is an acronym, a French acronym for Forêt d'enseignement et de recherche du lac du Parquet, essentially the Lake du Parquet Research and Teaching Forest, is situated in the boreal mixed-wood. Okay, so and not far, just over the Ontario-Quebec border, east of Madison, but an hour east of Madison. Another important point is that we are in the heart of the clay belt, the Great Clay Belt, so which extends up north in Quebec, but also, I don't know, this is Kapuskasing, Hearst, I don't know what would be the town or the area that to the west that identifies its western extension, but a very important physiographic region in terms of its influence on all kinds of things, whether it's forest dynamics, agricultural potential, other things. Just a brief explanation of where this clay belt came from. About 2,000 years before indigenous occupation, as the I don't know if my cursor is working, but as the last glacier was receding, a lake formed, the Lake Ojibwe, was prevented from draining. And for over 3 centuries, this lake was in place, and between summers when the lake was rough like any and turbid, and winters when it was covered with ice, annual rings, like annual growth rings of trees were laid down. So you see the fine silty clay layers of summer and the finer clay layers of winter rather, when the lake was frozen over and calm, that form these rings. So the varves, these are called varves, clay varves. And they're, what can I say? Well, they're pretty cool, and they're responsible for being, for the rich clay soils that we have in the region. Another point to underline is because of 2 reasons, not only the existence of the clay belt, but also of the history of colonization in the region. So this is what you see in this dark orange red is the zone of the Abitibi-Témiscamingue region, where not only we have clay soils, but we also have, over the course of the 20th century, considerable human disturbance, both for land clearing for agriculture and forestry. So that explains part of the reason why there's so much aspen poplar in this region, of course. And I apologize to all you people in Ontario, where I know you do this to us too. You cut us off, only Ontario exists. Well, here's a case where only Quebec exists. But we know the phenomenon of the existence of poplar species extends over into the clay belt of Ontario as well. Now, again, in my introduction, I'd like to explain that in Quebec forestry law, there are provisions for creating what we call research and teaching forests. They're parts of public land that are attributed or granted to educational institutions, universities, colleges, technical schools that have programs in forestry, basically to be used for training of professionals, and especially when they're associated with universities, with favoring research activities. So there's about 15, I think. University of Laval has a very big, biggest forestry research and teaching forest. The Lake du Parquet Research and Teaching Forest was established in 1995. It's about 80 8,000 hectares or 80 square kilometers. So it's pretty piddly in terms of large public forest, but it's an interesting area, just the same. Managed by the University of Quebec in Abitibi-Témiscamingue and the University of Quebec in Montreal. Has a long tradition of research coming up, in researchers, scientists coming up into this area. And I should mention is actually co-managed, or at least on our management committee, the two companies, forest companies, Norbord and Tembec, in the period. And of course, Tembec has changed. I remember Ryan, and I think it's changed again. And Norbord sit on our management committee. So the mission is, as I mentioned, emphasis on research and teaching. In terms of zoning, 3/4 of the territory principal activity is ecosystem-based management, doing operational trials and so on. And 1/3 is a conservation zone, actually a reference to natural forest, natural dynamics, and I will come to that in a minute. I've mentioned as well that the forest, the research forest is FSC certified over the last 10 years and received, as did Ryan, a leadership prize from FSC this year. Now, one of the first, and why there is so much activity, and why this forest was created, is due to probably one person, and that's Yves Bergeron, who during his doctoral work in the area, among other things, created what we call an ecological classification, which is a manner, for those who are not familiar, is a way of organizing our understanding of land and vegetation by understanding the relationships between topography, overlying bedrock and soils, drainage systems, and what is the vegetation in place. So this is all in French. You'll recognize the word till, and these are, if my cursor, you can see my cursor, it's sort of rocky outcrops, and then depending on where on slopes, we'll have well-drained tills, and lower down clay soils and different drainages, organic soils, and so on. So it's a way of organizing regionally or locally these arrangements. Now, what I'm going to talk about mostly in the first part is based on a paper that's now 25 years, a quarter of a century old, published by Yves and me in Forest Ecology and Management, which basically explained the ecological basis on which we develop the management plan for the Slate Park Research Forest. Okay, so I'll come back to after Yves' ecological classification. One of the first studies that was done at the same time that I was looking at post-harvest regeneration, a colleague and also doing his master's looked at fire history. So he did a fire history study of the area. This is Lake Parquet on your right. For this area, basically half of a county, a township rather. As you can see, a large part of the area burned. These are fire years, burned in 1760, and this 1760 fire burned up a lot of a good part of northeastern Ontario, and even the 1923 fire extends in the region of the Meguzzi River into Ontario as well. But on the right part of the forest map, you can see there are a whole lot of different fires, different fire years. So the most recent down at the bottom here in 1944, and the oldest in 1717. But then there are a whole lot of other ones in the 1800s, 1700s, and through the 19th century as well. So this little strip of 300 meters, and then as we go up here, basically is the conservation zone. We wanted to keep this mosaic of natural forests and different fire years as a reference to natural dynamics. So how is this done? Well, first of all, and these photos are not taken from the research forest, but recent fires can be dated either through current information that is available in ministry databases or by visiting them. Of course, coring is one of the most common ways. Here's a jack pine on the left. Coring that, you know, the jack pine is fire adapted. So core a few trees, and you've got the date of the last when this stand was established. And what is real treasure is if you can find living trees with multiple fire scars. So, and in fact, you see on the left here this photo of a snag, a dead tree with fire charcoal on it. And these trees, even though they've been dead for decades, can be dated, their origin and their age can be dated by using live trees and what we call interdating. So you do a core on live trees and you do a core on this snag or stump, and then you find corresponding patterns of similar growth patterns, and you can go back in time. Okay, and so even although I know of only one example in the Saguenay area in Quebec, where I think the Cathedral of Chicoutimi was used to go back even further in time, this approach of using beams from cathedrals in Europe has been used to interdate back for centuries, and this information has been used for documenting changes in climate, for example. Okay, so the interesting thing about this fire map is that it's an invaluable tool for use this scheme of a time machine where we're able to go back in time into these different burn areas and see how the forest, not only the forest composition has changed, but how different parts of different structures, different functions of the forest have changed over time. So as I said, here's the, I have my, the panel with all the elements of the zoom on the bottom here. So, but I know this is a photo from a forest that burned in 1944. Now take into consideration that all these four following photos were taken in the 1980s. And so this is not a 70-year-old, 75-year-old stand, but rather more of a 50-year-old, about a 50-year-old stand here in the 1960s. So you can see, again, these even-aged aspen, intolerant aspen comes in very well, as most people know from root suckering, and then a strata or layer of tolerant softwoods, so spruce, fir primarily, coming in under that. And then we get into even older forests where you can find, now here's a forest from the original, here's on your right, an aspen tree from the original 1823 fire. And we've got aspen trees, which might surprise some people, that are up to 190 years old. So an aspen of the original post-fire stand. Here's another one that has come in, maybe 40 or 60 years later. And then even here, you can see that there's a young sapling-sized aspen here. So that, and throughout that, spruce and fir, creating what is a multi-aged and structured, vertically complex stand. So very, very different from the original stand that we saw from the 1944 fire. So this is interesting. And then here's a photo from the 1760 fire where it's a little slightly damper spot, but we've got a huge old cedar basically dominating the site. So that's what we call a chronosequence, and there's some assumptions made in this kind of time traveling, but it shows how forest composition and forest structure change through time. But forest composition and structure are not the only thing, and once this fire map was done, well, Yves Bergeron had a whole host of students and collaborators who used this fire history map to look at other things. For instance, well, not only is it change from hardwood dominance, softwood dominance, but looking at biomass, how that, each one of these points is a different fire year. Okay, so on the bottom in all these four graphics that I'm going to show is time since fire from 0 up to 250 years. And then there's been a curve drawn through these different points. So biomass, looking at where biomass peaks is probably, from anywhere from 80 to 120 years when you've got that mix of intolerant hardwoods, so a lot of volume in the aspen, and then the conifers coming in as well to complement that. And then it sort of slacks off as the hardwood dies out. Obviously, this is mortality due to spruce budworm in balsam fir. So obviously, as the fir component decreases with time since fire, mortality increases to up to, in the last budworm outbreak in the 1970s and 1980s, up to 80% balsam fir in these older stands were killed. My colleague and true love, Suzanne Bray and colleagues, looked at how soil pH, soil acidity changes with time. And so as leaf litter changes to deciduous leaves to mixed and to dominant conifer litter, pH also changed in forest layer. And then Dan Nisha with Eve looked at advanced regeneration through these different fire years. And it's the curve is pretty wacky, but shows quite often very little conifer regeneration in the beginning and peaking in sort of the mid-succession stages and then decreasing later on. So those are just some, but there are a whole host of other things that were looked at, that have been looked at using this fire history map. And that has formed what we call a conceptual idea of how succession happens. And to simplify our conception, we talk about structural cohorts, where the first cohort is generally structured in even age, dominated by fire, after fire, are composed or occupied. These sites are occupied by fire adapted and intolerant species. So on these music clay soils, quite often it's aspen. On sandy soils, it would be jack pine, black spruce if it's there as well. And then tolerant softwoods may or may not be present in the understory. As time goes by, as whoever sings, these aspens start to die out. There's the tolerant conifers recruit into the crown layer, and so we get a more mixed structures, mixed composition, and slightly more complex structures. So we've got some of these first cohorts, and then shade tolerance coming in, and then if we hang around long enough, we get into this third cohort structure where almost all the first cohort, in the case of music clays, the aspen have died out, most of them. And then we've got a mixed, uneven age, mostly shade tolerant. And then, all different other aspects making these stands quite complex. So there's lots of dead wood, openings, and so on. The same thing, something similar, or not, maybe not so much happens, and this is a real simplification of what happens in the black spruce on these sites. So it's not the forest composition that changes as much as forest structure. So you've got black spruce coming in, black spruce dying, trees layering, and so what you get is you go from an even age simple structure to a more complex structure with deadwood and all different age classes. Okay, and of course there are variations on this, multiple pathways depending on the top. If there's no regeneration, no conifer regeneration in the first place, this may just be kind of a single species pathway to, as Stephen Cummings proved in Alberta, and mixed age aspen forest, or even as I've seen in Manitoba, where you get open shrubby, this could be hazelnut or other tall shrubs, woody shrubs coming in underneath it. But where there is regeneration, conifer, lots of conifer regeneration coming in, and this depends on what happened during the burn, what were the conditions during the burn, what was the forest makeup during the burn, what are the surroundings, are there seed sources, and so on, can develop into this more mixed and eventually conifer dominated structure. Okay, so knowing the understanding the mixed dynamics and using this cohort model, we looked at, well, what are the processes from moving this? We talk about succession. So succession involves recruitment of conifers. It involves mortality of intolerant hardwoods. So we get this gradual transition from, as I said, intolerant hardwoods to conifer dominated stands. And in these older stands, well, what happens in the absence of spruce budworm, or there's individual trees dying or groups of trees dying of senescence or possibly insect damage or other factors. So that's what we call gap dynamics. And I said, well, in any of these stages, if aspen is present in some way, it will come back like a lion and dominate again these stands. Okay, and then we said, well, what are the corollaries? What are the equivalents in terms of silvicultural interventions that we can use? So we said, well, if we want to be inspired by the natural processes, succession can be, I'll say, mimicked, or can be an analog to succession. In gaps, we can do selection cutting, or something varying where we take little bits of the forest out, little bits of the stands out. And then if we want to imitate clear cutting, well, you've seen it before, basically clear cutting, but certainly clear cutting of different forms, clear cutting with regeneration protection, clear cutting with regeneration protection, and retention, green tree retention, can to some extent mimic this. So if you want some visuals, here's a clear cut with some retention, partial cut in an aspen dominated stand with some conifer regeneration in the understory, and then what we could call maybe a selection or a gap cut in these third cohort very regular stands. Okay, so and this led to the installation of a number of different silvicultural trials. SAFE project, another French acronym, Sylviculture et Aménagement Forestier Écosystémique, basically forest ecosystem management silviculture, was put in place in the early 1990s, which looks at basically in this SAFE one first project in the series of SAFE experiments. So you've got the extremes, controls where we don't cut, clear cuts where we cut, and then two forms of partial cutting. 1/3 where we took out just the imminent mortality, those smaller trees that were about to be shaded out in any case and die, and then a partial cut, which mimic more stand breakup of older stands. So, and these have been used like the fire map for studying all kinds of things: regeneration, growth, mortality, certain insect populations, biomass, carbon, and so on. So I would mention as well, outside now, Lake Parquet Forest, there's about 100 square kilometers that were fire mapped. Another study, subsequent study, which covered an area between the 48th parallel and the 50th parallel, where so 16,000, close to 16,000 square kilometers were fire mapped, and the 49th parallel is basically the transition zone between the boreal mixedwood forest in the south and the black spruce forest to the north. What there are a couple, just very briefly, a couple of the outcomes, the results of this study. As you can see in this graphic, now on the bottom are the decades from the oldest fire, around 1600 to up until the present date of the study, which is close to 1990. And then the percentage of this forest area that was occupied by the different decades. So there are two things that come out of this. Is one that, you know, almost a quarter of this forest area has not been burned for over 200 years. And if we look at over 100 years, over 50% of this area had not burned for over 100 years. So one of the lessons, or one of the findings, principal findings, is that the natural forest mosaic is much older than previously thought. It's a kind of a modern forestry myth that boreal forests burned all the time and there were no forests over 120 years old, but this is definitely not the case. So, and the other thing is, if we look at, you know, this is another graphic of this very simply, if we look at fire cycle, and that is, you know, time it takes for an area to burn twice, and we look at the percentage of the landscape and divide that into intolerant hardwoods, mixed stands, or equivalent of our second cohorts, and conifer-dominated stands. If you're out in the prairie provinces where the fire cycle is very short, well, it's normal that you would find a forest landscape that is dominated by intolerant hardwoods and less so by mixed and conifer stands. Whereas if you go to the eastern extremity of the boreal mixed wood, so we're, you know, out east of Quebec City on the north shore of the St. Lawrence Valley, St. Lawrence Estuary, where fire cycles are very long, well, because it takes so long for fires to reoccur, the landscape, the forests have the time to evolve from intolerant hardwoods or mixed woods into conifer-dominant stands. So this has, you know, I'm mainly talking today about stand level phenomena, but this is kind of a relevant point besides that. Anyways, getting back to the Lake du Parquet forest, we use this understanding of fire cycle, and this is probably too complicated to really go into detail, but just to show you, maybe this will resonate more with foresters, as we set objectives for landscape levels objectives. So how much forest did we have in this first cohort? About half, and then the second and third cohort, those mixed wood and those complex conifer-dominated stands, should be about a quarter each. And how do we get there? Well, we use partial cutting to imitate succession to move these different types of stands forward in succession, and to recruit for these even-aged, relatively simple structured, equivalent to plantations, we clear cut. So it's even-aged silviculture, hopefully with natural regeneration, but not with plantations.
Brian, I just wanted
Yes.
to know the time. It's 20.
Okay.
No, you still have time.
Okay.
We usually start our question period at 1:45, so it's like 22. You still got.
Okay. Thank you. Which is about. Thank you. I was going to tell you, not give me a polite on. Okay, here I go, and I'm going to go quickly. So I want to, flip over to the second aspect. I'm talking about natural regeneration. And what controls natural regeneration? There are people that know a lot more about this than me. I think Dave Morris and Rob Fleming could keep this entire section. But seed protection, it takes mature trees, mass years. I'll talk about mass trees very quickly. Seed viability. Seed viability means that you need a lot of mature trees to make sure that seeds are pollinated. As you may or may not know, white spruce carry both male and female cones, and you have to have synchronization between when female cones, the ovules and female cones, are receptive, and when male cones are producing pollen. So you need a high density of trees to produce cones. Seed dispersal depends on tree height, what is around individual trees, seed mass, wind speed, and so on. And this is particularly interesting when we talk about retention silviculture for naturally regenerating spruce or other species. David Green, in his review, suggested that you can't expect to get adequate regeneration from white spruce further than 75 meters from the border from the edge of clear cut. And so, but important for leaving seed trees, leaving islands or patches of retention of green trees. You need adequate seed bed, normally mineral soil, thin mineral soil, and well-decomposed deadwood. And then germinal survival is dependent on a bunch of things: seed predation, squirrels, seed-eating birds, and so on, and environmental stress, competition. Okay, so I'm going to go very quickly here. This is a study done by a student of Suzanne Bray and I, who looked at pairing plots between the importance of deadwood in intact forest as a germination substrate. So she looked at for 2 years after following seed year. Basically, what she showed is that what's above this line and what's below this line shows the relative germination of both white birch, spruce, and fir. So basically, this shows that, and there's 3 classes in terms of state of decomposition of logs. Is that if it's above the line, then there's more regeneration on logs, and it's below, in the case of fir, greater receptibility, greater seed regeneration on the forest floor. So this shows the importance of logs for germination of particular species, especially white spruce. And here's an old aspen log with a number of white spruce that have established on it. And it just mentioned very clearly, it isn't evident here where the spruce are, but where the spruce aren't, you can see that one of the advantages of this is, first of all, you're higher up, out of the competition. There's not a competition here. It's a spring photo. And leaves tend to slough off, so they don't either smother seeds or prevent seeds from penetrating into soil or rotten wood, and they tend to slough off, so they don't smother seedlings, germinates after, as they would here. Okay, I very want to quickly get to a recent review article by actually Shim of University of Laval, and which Nelson's actually co-author. The concept, basically, to give you the context, they talk about first of all, in the context of radical change in terms of global change, conditions influencing establishment and growth and mortality of trees, question of social acceptability of different forms of management, that there's an imperative, there's an argument for modernizing, if you'd like, how we do silviculture experiments, and by extension, how we do management. So it's based on this concept of observation, anticipation, and adaptation. Observation, saying that, well, we've got all these fantastic new technologies available, whether it's LiDAR or other remote sensing, drones with cameras and so on, that we can we can observe rapidly. We've got models that can permit us to be more agile in terms of what's happening, how different factors, whether climatic or other, are changing growth processes. And then we should be able to adapt, knowing this, to be more agile, to be more to be quicker to change our practice, and quickly to check assess social acceptance of these. So I'm going to come back to my last slide for this. Masting, very briefly, masting is a phenomenon, a natural phenomenon in which trees, the number of species, spruce, but white pine, a lot of perennial species, from time to time, in case of spruce, it might be every 2 to 6 years, produce an incredible, disproportional number of cones. So you get high cone production in a certain year, and they seem to be synchronized. Now, an article by David Green, which is one of the co-authors, looked at this phenomenon, and I'm going to have to do this incredibly quickly, but he looked at what triggers synchronicity. So on the map on the left is you can see this gradient on the bottom. in the years 2004 and 2005. Where it's red, that means that July temperatures in 2005 were much higher than in 2004, whereas here they were much lower, okay? Each one of these points, whether they're gray or they're red, they represent sample sites where David Green and his colleagues went every year to see whether trees were masting or not. And in 2006, corresponding the year after this high temperature difference, there was masting everywhere in this area. I went to Quebec City in that year. I went to Thunder Bay. I camped at Nice Provincial Park. There were masting trees everywhere. It was just absolutely incredible. I was so excited. Then they showed another year, same kind of difference here, high temperature, higher temperatures in 2010 compared to 2009, but here, not so much synchronicity. So the long and the short of their article is that this temperature difference, positive temperature difference between two previous years does have an effect, a triggering effect on masting, but that synchronicity doesn't necessarily exist beyond 500 kilometers or so. Synchronicity is likely, in masting is likely to exist as to not exist, okay? So, okay, I'm accelerating here. So we did an experiment in 2005. We harvested, did a seed tree harvest in a spruce forest of 25 mature spruce. We had, in the following summer, in the mast here, we did site preparation, chipping, disc trenching, and control. So here you can see it was just chipped. Here it was chipped and then disc trenched, which this disc trenching creates these, has tendency to create more favorable seed beds of mineral soil for the humus as well. Okay, in summers and fall, spring, seed collection and counting, just to give you an idea, there were literally, I forget the number exactly, but somewhere above 8,000 or 10,000 million seeds dropped per hectare, okay? And just to show you, in fact, that, okay, in the first year, seedling density was about, you can see this gradient of controls to chipped, scarified, and then chipped and scarified increases the quantity of seed bed, and so you get up to 5 seedlings per year. And then in white on the bottom here, white columns, in 2007, black columns, 2008, showing the relative stocking. So the relative occupancy of the site. So it had well over 60%. So very quickly, I want to get back to this concept of observation, anticipation, and adaptation to make a plea. And I can do this because either I'm idealistic, I'm senile, or I'm hopeful. I think that, spruce is a noble species and it's a noble cause to try to regenerate it naturally. That maybe this is an objective that could be a joint venture, if you would, of the 3 groups that form this HAP group. And that I think there are probably some members of Native communities that are involved here that spend a fair amount of time on the land, and it could be sentinels to see whether masting years are happening early in the season. Industry, I would like to think, has the technology to locate industry and ministry where stands of where there's high white spruce density exists, and hopefully, at least on a small scale, could be agile enough to rapidly deploy, harvest, and site prepare to do these sites. And then the ministry could be adaptable or flexible, open as their role to allow special measures to be used to allow these operational regeneration trials to exist. So excuse me for running through this quickly. I'm probably a little bit dense, but that's about as much as I would like to present today. So thank you, merci to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. That was very interesting. I didn't want to stop you. But
Sorry.
just wanted to let you know of the time. But we're good. We still got 10 minutes for a question period. And I'm just going to stop the recording because I don't think we usually stop record the question period.